Part 3. The Evil. Chapter 18. In Hot Water. Okay, everyone, some aerobics to warm up. Bobby trotted enthusiastically onto the gym floor, clapping her hands, trying to get the girls up for their after-school practice. But they lingered against the wall, clustered in pairs, talking quietly. Come on, everyone. Line up. Let's warm up. Bobby's eyes wandered from girl to girl. Where's Corky? She wondered, and then remembered that Corky had to stay late in Miss Grant's science lab. She saw Jennifer wheel herself in, concentrating as she maneuvered her wheelchair through the double doors. Jennifer saw Bobby and smiled, giving her a little wave. Line up, Bobby insisted. Where's Miss Green? Kimmy asked, stepping forward slowly, holding her wrist with the white cast on it awkwardly. I don't know, Bobby told her. Are you going to warm up with us? Or does your wrist... My wrist is no concern of yours, Kimmy snapped. I'm not quitting the squad because of it, if that's what you mean. Her eyes burned angrily into Bobby's. Let's warm up. Come on, everyone, Bobby called out, ignoring Kimmy's anger. Slowly, the girls moved away from the wall and formed a line in front of Bobby. Bobby started up the tape player. They began their aerobics exercises, the same routine they had followed since school began. But they performed half-heartedly, grudgingly, without enthusiasm. Come on, let's work up a sweat, Bobby cried, working doubly hard as if to make up for their feeble effort. But the girls ignored her. Deborah and Ronnie, she saw, were carrying on a conversation while going through the motions. Bobby glanced toward the wall. Jennifer gave her a thumbs up, but it didn't cheer her. The girls, she knew, were deliberately not cooperating. She stopped the music. Let's work on steam heat, she suggested. Ronnie, do you want to take the end this time? Huh? Do you want to take the end? You can lead it. I don't know. Ronnie shrugged. Whatever. She turned back to her conversation with Deborah. Without Corky, I don't have anyone on my side, Bobby realized, suddenly overcome by a powerful wave of depression. Only Jennifer, I guess, but even she doesn't want to speak up for me in front of the girls, not after what happened to Kimmy. Okay, line up for steam heat, Bobby called out, struggling to keep up a show of enthusiasm. I think we should wait for Miss Green, Kimmy said defiantly. Yeah, let's wait, Deborah added quickly. No reason to wait, Bobby said unsteadily. She glanced up at the scoreboard clock. 3:45. We know what we have to work on, don't we? I still think we should wait, Kimmy said, a defiant challenge to Bobby's authority. Yeah, wait, Deborah muttered nastily. Heather and Megan nodded in sullen agreement. It's a mutiny, Bobby realized, suddenly dizzy. Line up, she insisted, glancing at Jennifer, whose smile had faded. She was watching the proceedings with a look of concern. Kimmy, if you have something to say to me, Bobby started. I think Miss Green has something to say to you, Kimmy replied smugly. Beside her, Ronnie snickered out loud. The double doors swung open, and Miss Green entered, taking long, rapid strides, carrying a bulging briefcase. Sorry I'm late, she called out, heading to her office in the corner. Seeing them on the floor, Bobby by herself in front of the sullen-looking group, Miss Green stopped. You've started? Not exactly, Kimmy told her, shooting Bobby a meaningful glance. No one seems to be in the mood to work today, Bobby reported reluctantly. Miss Green shifted the heavy briefcase to her other hand. Bobby, could I see you in my office for a minute? Yeah, sure, Bobby replied, dread building in the pit of her stomach, her throat tightening. Everyone, let's cancel practice for today, okay? Miss Green said, her eyes on Kimmy. Uh-oh, Bobby thought. She could feel the blood pulsing at her temples. We'll regroup tomorrow afternoon, Miss Green said. Talking quietly among themselves, the cheerleaders obediently moved off the floor and began to collect their belongings. Bobby realized that all of them were avoiding looking at her. She caught a smug grin on Kimmy's face. But Kimmy quickly turned her head and walked away with Deborah and Ronnie. They all know what Miss Green is going to say to me, Bobby realized. And I know too. As the gym quickly emptied out, Bobby followed Miss Green to her office, her heart pounding, her legs suddenly feeling as if they weighed 1,000 pounds. Miss Green dropped the briefcase onto her desk. She sifted through a few pink phone message sheets and then looked up at Bobby. "Health forms," she said, patting the briefcase. "They weigh a ton. You've got to be strong to be in the phys ed department." Bobby stood awkwardly in front of the desk, nervously toying with the strand of her hair. When Miss Green motioned her toward a seat, Bobby obediently lowered herself into it, folding her hands in her lap. She realized she was perspiring. It was so hot in the gym, and she had been the only one to really work during the aerobics warm-ups. "Bobby, I'm really sorry," Miss Green said abruptly, setting down the pink message sheets and leaning with both hands on the desktop. "I have to ask you to step down from the squad." "Oh?" Bobby uttered a short cry. She had anticipated those very words, but somehow they had come as a surprise anyway. "I really don't," she started. Miss Green held up a hand to silence her. "I don't want to discuss what happened yesterday. I know you wouldn't deliberately try to injure one of the girls, but what happened happened. Whether it was a loss of concentration or whatever, it happened." She sat down, leaning forward over the desk, playing with an opal ring on her right hand. "You're a very talented cheerleader, Bobby," she continued. "You and your sister. I like you both. But after yesterday, I'm afraid you've lost the confidence of the squad." "Confidence?" Bobby managed to utter in a tight, choked voice. She suddenly realized she was breathing hard. Drops of perspiration were sliding down her forehead, but she made no attempt to wipe them away. "A squad is built on trust, and the girls just don't feel they can trust you," Miss Green said, lowering her voice, her face expressionless. "They've made it very clear to me. Whether it's true or not, they believe that you deliberately didn't catch Kimmy yesterday." She cleared her throat noisily, covering her mouth with one hand. "I'm really sorry, Bobby. I have no choice. I have to ask you to quit." Bobby lowered her head, struggling to stop her body from shaking, struggling to hold back her tears. "I understand," she managed to whisper. "If you'd like to talk to someone," Miss Green offered, her eyes sympathetic. "A doctor, I mean. If you'd like me to recommend someone you could confide in." Bobby rose to her feet. She had to get out of there, she realized. She felt hot and cold and shaky and sick. "No, thanks. I'll just leave now," she said, turning to the door, avoiding Miss Green's stare. "I know how you must feel," Miss Green said, standing too. "If there's anything I can do—" A few seconds later, Bobby found herself in the locker room. Alone, her footsteps echoing on the damp concrete floor. She choked back a sob. "I'm wringing wet. I'll take a shower," she decided. "Change into street clothes. That'll make me feel better." She thought she heard a scraping sound from another row of lockers. "Anybody here?" she called in a quivering voice. No reply. "Now I'm hearing things, too," she said out loud. "Oh well," she thought, pulling her sweatshirt over her head. "At least now I'll have more time to study." With that thought, the sob she'd been holding back burst out. "How could this happen to me? How could this happen? Am I really going crazy?" Leaving her clothes on the bench, she pulled a towel from her locker and patted over the damp floor toward the shower room. A warm shower will be soothing, she decided. She'd make it nice and hot. It would stop the trembling, stop the chills down her back. She turned at the entrance to the showers, thinking she heard someone again. She listened. Again, silence. She stepped into the large shower room with its stained tile walls, its row of chrome shower heads. The floor was puddled with cold water left over from last period gym class. Bobby shivered. I'm so cold, so cold. As she reached up to turn on the water, metal doors nearby slammed shut with a clang. Huh? At first, Bobby wasn't sure what had happened. She jumped, startled by the loud, unexpected noise. Maybe someone had entered the dressing area outside, she decided. But then she saw that the shower room doors had been closed. That's weird, she thought. She turned on the water and screamed as scalding water burst out of the shower head with a roar, striking her chest, her shoulders. Ow! She dodged away, but the next shower head was spraying down hot water too, scalding hot, burning hot. Help! All the showers were turned on now, scalding hot water shooting out of all of them. Something's wrong, Bobby realized, stumbling back in a panic, her chest burning, her legs burning. Something's terribly wrong. Ow! She slipped and toppled backward, landing with a splash in a steaming puddle. Help! Scrambling to her feet, she saw that the hot water was rising rapidly. The drain appeared to be clogged. Ow! The water was nearly an inch deep already, and so hot it burned her feet. The steam rose like a thick, choking curtain. Gasping in the hot, wet air, Bobby lunged for the doors. She tugged on the handles. Hey! They wouldn't move. Hey! She struggled to push open the doors, but they were stuck, or blocked, or locked. Hey! The steam was thick. She felt as if her lungs were burning, filling up. It was so hard to breathe. Crying out from the pain of the scalding water, she hopped back to the wall of the shower heads, reaching for the first control knob, turned it, turned. To her horror, the water didn't slow, didn't grow colder. Frantically, she turned another knob, another. Ow! She couldn't shut them off. I can't breathe! The steam was so thick, so hot. I can't see! She slipped, stumbling back to the double doors. Help me! She choked out a desperate cry. Somebody help! The water was up over her ankles. Why wouldn't it drain? She danced wildly, a dance of unbearable pain. Help me! I can't breathe! The rush of water became a roar. She closed her eyes and covered her ears. The roar didn't go away. The pain didn't go away. The roar grew louder. Then all was silence. Chapter 19. What Corky Found. Where'd everyone go? Corky wondered. She stepped into the gym, shifting her backpack to her other shoulder. Anyone here? She called, her voice echoing against the high ceiling. Her sneakers squeaked on the shiny polished floor. She glanced up at the scoreboard clock. Not even 4:30. Practice usually lasted until 5, she knew. So where was everyone? Had they moved the practice outdoors? Sometimes they did that on nice days. It was good to practice in the stadium, get some fresh air, get out of the gym, which was usually stifling hot. But it was gray and blustery outside today. Not a day for an outdoor practice. Her footsteps echoed as she made her way to Miss Green's office and peered in through the big glass window. Empty. The papers all neatly stacked to one corner of the desk. The chair pushed in. I guess practice ended early for some reason, Corky thought, shaking her head. Well, Bobby must be glad. She wasn't in any mood to face the girls anyway. Bobby. I wanted to talk to her. To make up, Corky thought. She pushed open the door to the locker room and stuck her head inside. Bobby? Anyone? The locker room seemed empty, too. She was about to close the door when she heard the sound of rushing water. Someone's taking a shower, she decided. She made her way into the locker room, warmer and steamier than usual, through a row of lockers. She spotted someone's clothes tossed onto one of the long benches that stretched in front of the lockers. On the other side of the lockers, she could hear the rush of shower water going full force. She picked up the sweatshirt, recognized it as Bobby's. So Bobby was taking a shower? By herself? Where were the other girls? This didn't make any sense. Corky took a step toward the shower room, then stopped. She had spotted something on the floor under Bobby's things, something shiny. She bent down and picked it up, bringing it up close to her face to examine it. It was Kimmy's silver pendant, the shiny little megaphone. It must have fallen off again, Corky decided. She rolled it into a tissue and stuffed it into the pocket of her jeans. I'll have to remember to return it to her. She walked past the lockers, turned toward the shower room, then stopped in surprise. The shower doors were closed. Weird, she thought. The shower doors were never closed. She didn't even know they could close. As Corky drew nearer, the rush of water on the other side of the door grew louder. Could one shower make all that noise? She wondered. She knocked on the metal door. Hey, Bobby! No reply. Bobby? She pounded harder. She can't hear me over the water, Corky decided. She put a hand on each of the 2 door handles and pulled. The doors swung open easily. Hey! Corky shrieked as a tidal wave of hot water came spewing out at her. Whoa! Startled, she staggered back until she bumped into the side of a locker. The hot water rolled over her sneakers, washed up onto the legs of her jeans. Ow! Hey! It was boiling hot. She looked up to see thick white steam floating into the locker room, like a fog rolling over a beach. What's going on? She wondered, more angry than frightened. Who closed the doors? Where is Bobby? The steaming hot water flooded through the locker room, but it sounded as if the water had been shut off. Walking on tiptoe, Corky made her way back to the shower room. Holding on to the tile wall, she peered inside, squinting against the swirling steam, and saw Bobby, lying face down against the wall under the shower heads. Bobby? Through gaps in the parting fog, her body slowly became visible. Her arms were crumpled beneath her. Her legs were folded. Her hair was soaked and matted over her head and onto the floor. Her back, her legs, her skin, her entire body was as red as a lobster. Bobby? Gripped with fear, Corky plunged into the room, dropped to her knees in the scalding water. Bobby? With a loud gasp, she reached down and pulled her sister's head up by the hair. Bobby? Bobby? Please? Bobby stared back at her with vacant, wide-eyed terror. Her flesh swollen and red, her mouth locked open in a silent scream. Bobby? No. No answer. The heavy steam settled over Corky, making her shiver. Holding her sister tightly in her arms, Corky knew that Bobby would never answer her again. Chapter 20. Corky Figures It Out. A pearly full moon seemed to hover over the Fear Street Cemetery, casting pale, ghostly light over the jagged tombstones. Trees whispered and shook their nearly leafless branches in the cold, gusting wind. Corky slipped on wet leaves, and she nearly lost her balance. A light rain had just ended, leaving the weed-choked ground between the graves soft and muddy. Like quicksand, she thought. She had a sudden picture of sinking into the ground, of being pulled down, down until only her head poked out. And then it too would be sucked into the mud to join the corpses. Something slithered through the clump of dead leaves near her feet. A squirrel? A mouse? Even in a graveyard, there are living things, she thought. She shivered and dug her bare hands deeper into her coat pockets. The wind died down as she made her way along the path through the old section of graves. Bobby was buried in a new section up a little hill, away from the street. Corky knew the way well. The old tombstones, poking up from the ground like rotting teeth, cast long shadows on the ground at Corky's feet. At the end of the first row, she stopped. Why did the stone on the end look familiar? Creeping closer, her boots sinking into the mud, Corky read the inscription. Sarah Fear, 1875 to 1899. Sarah Fear, Corky said aloud, staring at the carved name. She suddenly remembered. This was the grave that Jennifer had been found sprawled on that horrible night she had been thrown from the bus. Sarah Fear. And what were these 4 stones behind Sarah Fear's grave? Moving closer, Corky leaned down to read the low stones. The names had been worn off over the years, but the dates were clearly readable. They had all died in the same year, 1899. 4 grave markers with the same year that Sarah Fear had died. What had happened? Corky wondered. Had Sarah Fear's entire family been wiped out at once? People died so young back then, Corky thought, climbing to her feet. Sarah Fear would have been only 24. Without realizing it, she uttered a loud sob. Bobby was only 17. Hands shoved in her jacket pockets, Corky turned away from the old graves and made her way along the familiar path up to the new section. The wind picked up again, cold and wet. She could hear a dog howling mournfully somewhere down the block. The trees shivered their wintry limbs. Dead leaves scattered as if trying to flee. Here I am, Corky said, placing a hand on top of her sister's temporary marker. You're probably getting tired of seeing me. How many times had Corky visited her sister's grave since the funeral 2 weeks before? Nearly every day. I just miss you so much, Corky whispered, holding on to the cold marker, feeling the tears well up in her eyes. She thought about the funeral, saw it all again, the flowers so bright and colorful and out of place on that gray, mournful day. Her parents, holding hands, leaning against each other, hiding their faces so outsiders couldn't see their pain. Again, Corky saw the cheerleaders huddled together, silent and pale. Jennifer stayed by herself in the wheelchair, a wool blanket over her legs, tears trickling down her cheeks. Chip had been there too, looking awkward and uncomfortable. He had been nice to Corky, tried to say something comforting, but ended up stammering about how sorry he was and hurrying off. And Kimmy. Kimmy had been there too, standing a little way off from the other cheerleaders, her arms crossed tightly in front of her, her expression grim, unchanging, her eyes on Chip. A cold drizzle had begun to fall when they lowered Bobby's coffin into the ground. Corky felt her mother's arms go around her and Sean. They were all weeping, she realized, their tears dropping into the open grave. Corky had looked up through tear-clouded eyes to see Kimmy again, still staring at Chip. And then, as the drizzle turned to a hard, steady rain, people started to leave, pushing up their coat collars, ducking under black umbrellas. Jennifer's father appeared and wheeled her away. Chip had hurried off, taking long, awkward strides over the mud. Kimmy left with the other cheerleaders, their heads lowered, bent against the wind and rain. Corky and her family were left alone, without Bobby forever. And now it was 2 weeks later, and Corky still couldn't get used to the idea that she no longer had her sister to talk to. I'm back again, Corky said, turning her eyes up to the full moon. I know you can't hear me, Bobby. I just wish you could answer. Her next words caught in her throat. She stopped, took a deep breath, taking in the sweet, cold air. I just wanted to tell you the news, she continued after a long pause. They made Kimmy captain of the cheerleaders. You probably guessed that would happen, right? Well, everyone seems real happy about it. Especially Kimmy. The news sure made her risk it better in a hurry. Corky sighed. She rubbed her palm against the cold marker. Everyone turned to look at me when Miss Green made the announcement, Corky continued, as if I would throw a fit or storm out or something. And then she added bitterly, as if I would care. She kicked away a leaf that had blown onto a leg of her jeans. I don't care anymore, Bobby. I really don't, she said with growing emotion. I don't know what to care about now. I just wish you were here so that I could apologize for being mean to you the night before you died. I just wish you were here so you could tell me what happened. Corky sobbed. What happened in that shower room? Why didn't you open the door and come out? The police say you had some kind of seizure and died instantly. I was glad that you didn't suffer, but I just can't understand it. Why? How did it happen? You weren't sick. You were in great shape. What happened, Bobby? What happened? Then she was crying, big tears rolling down her cheeks, her nose running, the sound of her own cries pushed back at her by a rush of cold wind. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She apologized to the silent, unanswering gravestone. I keep coming here day after day, saying the same things. It's just... Corky shoved her hand into her jeans pocket, searching for a tissue. Digging deep, she found one, balled up. She pulled it out and saw something shiny fall out. She bent down and searched the wet ground at her feet until she found it. Then she stood to examine it. Kimmy's megaphone pendant. She had found it that day, on the locker room floor, near Bobby's clothes, on that horrible day. She had tucked it into her jeans pocket, forgot all about it. As she stared at it, watching it gleam in the cold white moonlight, Corky realized that here was a clue. Here, in her trembling hand, Kimmy had been there. Kimmy had been in the locker room, had been near Bobby's things. Oh no, Corky said aloud, squeezing the pendant tight in her fist. Oh no. Oh no. Did Kimmy have something to do with Bobby's death? No one had more motive, Corky realized. No one resented Bobby more than Kimmy. In fact, it wasn't just resentment. It was hatred. Open hatred. Kimmy hated Bobby because she was cheerleader captain, because Chip had dropped Kimmy and asked Bobby out, because Bobby was pretty and blonde and talented and Kimmy wasn't. Because of everything. Yes, Kimmy was there, Corky said aloud. Kimmy was there when Bobby died, and I have the proof in my hand. And then, without realizing it, she was running between the rows of graves, her boots sliding and slipping in the mud. With the pendant wrapped tightly in her fist, she was running down to the street. And then she was home and in the car, starting it up, the engine roaring to life, the headlights cutting through the dark night air. I have the proof. I have the proof. And then she squealed away from the house, following the curve of Fear Street, past the dark old houses, past the trembling, nearly bare trees, and turned toward Kimmy's house. A few minutes later, her heart pounding, the pendant still clutched tightly in her fist, she was staring up at the large, white-shingled house, the windows all lit up, a silver Volvo parked in the drive. Kimmy's mother opened the door, surprised to see Corky there so late, unannounced. Corky rushed past her without any explanation, tore through the front hallway, swallowing hard, gasping for air, and burst into the den. Kimmy was there with Deborah and Ronnie. Hey! She called out as Corky entered. Here! Corky screamed accusingly, unwrapped her fist, and thrust the silver megaphone pendant into Kimmy's face. Kimmy started, and her eyes grew wide with surprise. Chapter 21. Kimmy's Surprise. It's my proof! Corky cried. Ronnie jumped to her feet. Deborah stared up at Corky from the floor, a notebook in her lap. My proof! Corky repeated, holding the pendant in front of Kimmy's startled face. Where'd you get it? Kimmy asked, locking her eyes onto Corky's. You left it somewhere, Corky said, shaking all over from her anger. Huh? You left it somewhere, and now it's my proof, Corky exclaimed. Corky, are you okay? Ronnie asked, moving over to her and putting a hand gently on her trembling shoulder. You'd better sit down, Deborah said, closing her notebook. You don't look very well. Corky pulled away from Ronnie's hand. You were there. You were there when Bobby died, she snarled, staring accusingly at Kimmy. Kimmy's mouth dropped open, but she didn't reply. Here's my proof, Corky said, waving the pendant in Kimmy's face. Listen to Deborah, Kimmy said finally. Sit down, she pointed to the couch. You're not making any sense, Corky. I found this in the locker room, Corky said, ignoring Kimmy's words. On the day Bobby died, I found it on the floor. I found it. Corky, please, Kimmy insisted. Sit down. Let me get you something hot to drink. You're shaking like a leaf. Don't change the subject, Corky screamed, realizing she was out of control, not caring at all. I have the proof, Kimmy. I have the proof. I found your pendant under Bobby's things. Kimmy's expression changed from surprise to concern. Corky, she said softly, that pendant isn't mine. Chapter 22. Jennifer's Surprise. Huh? Corky took a step back, her expression one of suspicion and disbelief. It isn't mine anymore, Kimmy said, her eyes on the pendant. But I gave it to Jennifer, Kimmy said. She's telling the truth, Deborah said quickly. Holding her notebook, she climbed to her feet and stepped up beside Kimmy as if taking sides. Ronnie had moved back to the window and was leaning against the ledge, a troubled look on her face. Jennifer? Corky asked weakly, suddenly feeling as if she were falling down a dark, endless hole. I gave it to Jennifer about a month ago, Kimmy said, resting her hand on her hips. She was always telling me how much she liked it. So one day I saw her in the hall before school, and I just gave it to her. No, Corky insisted. You always wore it. She's telling the truth, Deborah insisted. I was there when Kimmy gave it to Jennifer. Jennifer was really happy. I was tired of it anyway, Kimmy said, with a shrug. The clasp was loose. It was always falling off. Corky stared hard into Kimmy's eyes. She was telling the truth, Corky realized. But that meant, you hated my sister, Corky declared, unwilling to let Kimmy off the hook. Kimmy shook her head and turned her eyes to the window. I didn't like her very much, Corky, but I didn't hate her. I guess I resented her a lot. I guess I was a little jealous of her. A little? Corky cried. Okay, a lot, Kimmy admitted. But I'm not a murderer. I wouldn't kill someone because of cheerleading. Jennifer, Corky stammered. Jennifer isn't a killer either, Kimmy said softly. She shook her head. You know that, Corky. Poor Jennifer. But the pendant, Corky said, staring down at it in her hand. Jennifer must have dropped it, Kimmy replied. Just like I always did. I told you, the clasp was loose. Corky's mind whirled crazily from thought to thought. She stared at the pendant as if hypnotized by it. The room started to tilt, then spin. Once again, she felt as if she were falling down a bottomless, dark pit. Corky! Kimmy grabbed her arm. Jennifer couldn't change her clothes in the locker room, Corky said, closing her eyes, trying to make the room stop spinning, trying to make the falling sensation stop. Jennifer always changed at home. She wouldn't go in the locker room. Yeah, maybe, Kimmy agreed. But, Corky, why would Jennifer go in the locker room? Why? What was she doing there? Corky screamed. Corky, stop! You're not thinking clearly, Kimmy cried. Sit down, Ronnie said from across the room. Somebody make her sit down. Maybe we should call her parents, Deborah said at the same time. No, Corky screamed, pulling out of Kimmy's grasp. No, I have to talk to Jennifer. I have to. I have to know the truth. Corky, please, let us call your parents, Kimmy pleaded. But Corky had already run out of the den and was making her way down the front hallway. The three girls called to her, begging her to come back. What on earth is going on? Kimmy's mom cried, poking her head out of the living room. Corky flew past her and out into the dark, cool night. Corky, come back! Come back! Come back and talk! She ignored their pleas, their frantic, high-pitched shouts. The car started quickly. The lights shot on, and she headed the car towards Jennifer's house in North Hills. Past houses darkened for the night, past empty yards and woods filled with silent, bending trees. Past Shadyside High, dark except for the spotlight out front, throwing a shimmering cone of light onto the front doors. Jennifer's house was on a side street just north of the school. As Corky turned the corner, her headlights swept over the low ranch-style house. She braked hard, slowing the car down the street from the house, and stared across the smooth lawn. Dark. All the windows were dark, the shades drawn, curtains pulled. Corky glanced at the dashboard clock. 11 o'clock. Guess they all go to bed early, she said out loud. And then she saw the headlights of the car parked at the curb in front of Jennifer's house flash on. It was a red Skylark, Corky saw. The car pulled slowly away from the curb and edged into the driveway to turn around. The interior lights came on for a second, and the girl in the car was illuminated. It's Jennifer, Corky saw, her mouth dropping open. I didn't know she could drive. I didn't think she could move her legs enough to push the pedals. She watched her pull the car halfway up the drive, then back up into the street, then pull off in the other direction. Jennifer's headlights filled Corky's car with a blinding white light. She's coming right at me, Corky thought. She'll see me. Corky ducked her head, covered her face with the sleeve of her coat. Jennifer didn't seem to notice her. The Skylark rolled slowly past, then turned right, heading toward the school. Where could Jennifer be going by herself at 11 o'clock at night? Corky wondered. Deciding to follow her, she eased the car into Jennifer's driveway and turned around just as Jennifer had done. Then she floored the gas pedal and shot around the corner, eager to catch up. Racing down Park Drive, Corky quickly saw that their cars were the only two on the road. She slowed down, deciding to keep at least a block between her car and Jennifer's. Where is she going? Where? The question repeated and repeated in her mind. The full moon floated at the top of the windshield, as if leading the way. A raccoon scooted into the road, hesitated in Corky's headlights, then just made it safely to the other side as Corky rolled by. As she followed a block behind the red Skylark, Corky's thoughts went back to her emotional encounter with Kimmy. Kimmy appeared to be telling the truth about the silver pendant, and she truly seemed to be concerned about Corky. What did that mean? Was Jennifer in the locker room the afternoon Bobby was killed? Bobby and Jennifer had become best friends. There was no reason to suspect that Jennifer might have killed Bobby. No reason at all. So what was she doing there that afternoon? And what was she doing now? Corky followed the Skylark as it turned onto Old Mill Road. As an oncoming car shot its headlights forward, Corky could see Jennifer's shadow reflected on the back window of the little car. She's heading for Fear Street, Corky realized. But why? Is she going to my house? An unexpected visit? No, Jennifer isn't my friend. She was Bobby's friend. Bobby's friend. Bobby's friend. Bobby's friend. The words repeated until they didn't make any sense. Nothing made any sense. She followed Jennifer's car as it turned onto Fear Street, past the sprawling ramshackle old houses, past the burnt-out ruins of the old Simon Fear mansion high on its sloping weed-covered lawn. And then suddenly, after Fear Street curved into the thick woods, Corky saw Jennifer pull her car to the side of the road. Her headlights dimmed, then went out. Corky hit the brakes, her car sliding to a stop less than a block behind. Quickly, she cut her lights. Corky wondered, why is she stopping here? Leaning forward to get a better view through the windshield, she saw where Jennifer had stopped. The cemetery. The Fear Street Cemetery. Squinting through the darkness, she saw Jennifer's car door swing open. Saw Jennifer's hand on the door handle, pushing the door open, holding it open. Then she saw Jennifer turn and put her feet down on the pavement. "Oh, I don't believe it!" Corky muttered to herself as Jennifer pulled herself to her feet. Stood up. Stepped away from the car, slammed the door, walked onto the grass of the cemetery. Walked. "I don't believe it!" Corky repeated, gaping at the slender, dark figure disappearing behind the gravestones. She walks. She can walk. Bobby was right. That night in front of Jennifer's house, Bobby was right, and I thought she was crazy. Corky leapt out of the car, closing the door silently behind her. Then she began jogging along the curb, running as quietly as she could, staying in the shadows thrown by the tall trees. She stopped and knelt behind a gnarled old oak and peered where Jennifer had gone. Wisps of fog floated over the graveyard. The moonlight filtering through the fog tinged everything with a pale, sickly green. Shadows shifted and shimmered in the eerie green light. The jagged tombstones glowed. As Corky leaned against the cold, damp tree trunk, peering intently into the dimly lit scene, Jennifer reemerged, dancing. Dancing a strange, silent dance. Her arms over her head, her legs, those legs everyone believed to be paralyzed, twirled and kicked. A silent, cheerless tango. She was wearing her cheerleader costume. The short skirt flew up as she spun. Her dark hair flew behind her as if alive. And what was that she was waving in her hand? Corky squinted into the misty green light. It was the pennant. The Shadyside pennant they had made for her after the accident. The crippling accident. And now here was Jennifer, twirling wildly in the green moonlight, kicking and twirling, waving the pennant high, dancing in a narrow circle, bending her back, raising her face to the moon, her long hair flowing down nearly to the ground. Round and round, around a tombstone, Corky realized. Jennifer was circling a tall tombstone surrounded by 4 other stones. Sarah Fear's tombstone. Waving the pennant, she kicked her legs high as if leading a silent parade. Then, once again, she arched her back, raising her face to the moon. Her eyes closed. The pale green light played off her face. She bowed deeply, crossing her legs as she dipped, a strange curtsy to the moon. And then she rose up and began moving slowly to an unheard rhythm, twirling around the gravestone, her eyes closed, a strange, tranquil smile on her face. Corky couldn't stand it any longer. Pushing herself away from the tree, she lurched forward into the graveyard, her boots sinking into the wet mud. "Jennifer!" she called, her voice sounding tiny and hollow on the wind. "Jennifer? What's going on?" Chapter 23. I'm not Jennifer. Jennifer halted her strange dance and opened her eyes. Her smile faded. She lowered the pennant to her side. Corky ran, stopping before the first row of gravestones. "Jennifer, what are you doing?" Jennifer's eyes reflected the green moonlight as she turned to face Corky. I'm not Jennifer, she said, her voice husky, almost breathless. Huh? Jennifer, I saw you dancing, Corky cried. I'm not Jennifer, she repeated darkly, standing directly in front of Sarah Fear's tombstone. Then she screamed, I'm not Jennifer! Jennifer, I saw you, Corky insisted. As if in reply, Jennifer lifted one hand high above her head and waved as if summoning someone. "Oh!" Corky cried, raising her hands to her face as the grass flew off Sarah Fear's grave and the dirt began to rise. Jennifer waved her hand high above her head, and the dirt rose up like a dark curtain, flying off the grave, flying high into the black sky. And then the dirt was swirling around them both, thicker and thicker, until Corky couldn't see beyond it, until Corky was forced to move closer to Jennifer. Faster and faster the curtain of dirt swirled until it became a raging dark whirlwind, like a tornado funnel. Covering her eyes with her arm, Corky staggered forward until she was standing face to face with Jennifer. Jennifer held her hand high as if directing the swirling dirt, her eyes aglow with excitement, the excitement of her power. "Jennifer, what are you doing? Stop it! Stop it, please!" Corky's frightened plea was drowned out by the roar of the spinning dirt. The roar drowned out all sound, all thought. She could no longer see the moon, or the sky, the graves, the trees. Inside the dark funnel of dirt, she could see only Jennifer. Jennifer, her eyes glowing with an eerie green light, glaring at Corky, her expression hard, angry, her hand still raised high over her head. They were alone, the two of them, trapped inside this frightening storm of graveyard dirt. And then the roar faded and died as the dirt continued to whirl around them, and Jennifer's throaty voice, a voice Corky had never heard before, rose in the fresh silence. "I am not Jennifer," she repeated, glaring coldly at Corky. "Jennifer is dead. Jennifer died weeks ago." "What are you saying?" Corky cried, wrapping her arms around herself as if for protection. "What is happening?" "Jennifer died in the bus accident," the husky voice revealed, her eyes lighting up as if the words were giving her pleasure. "She was dead that night in the rain. She died on top of Sarah Fear's grave." "Jennifer, what are you saying?" Corky cried, her eyes darting around, searching for an escape route. But the swirling dark column of dirt offered no hope of escape. "I waited so long, the husky voice said, deepening with sudden sadness. "I waited so long, and then Jennifer came along." "I don't understand," Corky started. "I don't—" "Buried for so long," the voice continued. "Buried down there for 100 years, with Sarah Fear, waiting. You're Sarah Fear?" Corky stammered, staring into the angry, glowing eyes. "Not anymore," came the reply. Corky shuddered and hugged herself tightly. "This isn't happening." The heavy funnel of dirt from the grave continued to swirl silently around the two girls, blocking out all sound, all light, all evidence that the rest of the world existed. I don't get it," Corky stammered. "Are you some kind of ghost? An evil spirit?" Again, Jennifer threw back her head in laughter. "This is a quaint way of putting it," she replied, sneering. She pointed down to the grave. "Nearly 100 years I waited down there for a new body. And then Jennifer came along." "Please," Corky cried, lowering her hands to her sides. "Stop. Let me go now, okay?" Jennifer shook her head, her eyes lighting up with pleasure. "No, please," Corky begged. "Let me go. What do you want with me?" A thin smile played over Jennifer's lips. "It's your turn to go down there," she said, pointing into the grave. Chapter 24. Into the Coffin. No! Corky tried to back away. But she was trapped inside the spinning dirt as thick as a garden wall. Jennifer leaned forward until her eyes burned so close to Corky that she could feel their heat. Nearly 100 years I waited. But now I'm alive inside Jennifer, and Jennifer's enemies will pay. Again she pointed down into the grave. Now it's your turn, Corky. But why? Corky cried. I haven't done anything to you. Haven't done anything? You and your sister, with your perfect faces, your perfect bodies, your perfect lives. But Corky turned her head, tried to get away from the searing heat of the evil, burning eyes. A bitter smile formed on Jennifer's eerily glowing face. But I showed Bobby and that boy Chip. You frightened them, Corky said, realizing what had happened, realizing that her sister's wild stories were all true. You paralyzed them, and then you killed Bobby, Corky said, choking out the words. Jennifer nodded once and locked her eyes on Corky. Now it's your turn. No! Jennifer, wait! Corky screamed. The evil spirit inside Jennifer's body laughed scornfully. She pointed at her feet. Look down there, Corky dear. Look down at your new home. Corky, too frightened to disobey, turned her eyes down. With another wave of Jennifer's hand, more dirt flew up into the swirling dirt funnel. As the dirt rose up in eerie silence, Corky stared down into a deep hole. To her horror, the hole revealed the top of a coffin, the dark wood swollen and warped. See your new home? And your new friend, the evil spirit cried in its hoarse, dead voice. Oh, Corky moaned weakly as the coffin lid creaked open. Still compelled to peer down into the darkness, Corky watched the lid lift all the way up. Inside the coffin, she saw a rotting skeleton, its eyeless skull staring up at her with a toothy grin. The skeleton was moving, quivering all over. No, staring hard, unable to remove her eyes from the ghastly sight, Corky saw why the skeleton appeared to quiver. Those were worms moving on the bones. Thousands of white worms slithering over the skeleton, crawling over the rotting remains of Sarah Fear. Oh! Corky felt her stomach heave, felt her throat tighten in disgust. She shut her eyes and turned away, but the sight of the thousands of slithering white worms stayed with her. Swallowing hard, trying to shake away the horrifying picture, she suddenly heard voices. Far away, yet familiar. For a brief, terrifying moment, she thought it was the voice of Sarah Fear, calling to her from down in the open grave. But then she recognized Kimmy's voice, and heard Deborah's reply, and Ronnie's frightened shout. The voices sounded far away because they came from outside the wall of dirt. They must have followed me, Corky realized. Your friends are too late to save you, Jennifer said calmly, without urgency. She raised both hands. No, please, Corky screamed. Please, don't! Ignoring her cries, Jennifer shoved Corky with startling strength, inhuman strength. Still screaming, Corky toppled into the hole, down to join Sarah Fear in the open, worm-ridden coffin. Chapter 25. Corky loses. down into the hole, into the warped, swollen coffin, down to the white worms. But even in her screaming terror, Corky's body responded, remembering the cheerleading skills, the moves her body had practiced over the years until they had become reflexive, a part of her. She landed hard on her feet, absorbed the pressure of the landing by bending her knees, then pushed up into a high standing jump, raised her hands, caught the top of the open grave as the wall of dirt began to swirl back down on her, pulled herself up and out as the dirt began to lower itself back into the hole. Panting loudly, she crawled away from the hole, away from the horror. Jennifer had already turned away, turned around to face the 3 cheerleaders. Still acting by reflex, her mind still paralyzed by the horrors of the open grave, her body forced to act on its own, Corky flung herself on Jennifer, caught her from behind, wrapped her arms around Jennifer's waist, swung her back toward the open grave. She struggled to wrestle Jennifer into the hole, into the coffin, to wrestle the evil spirit back to where it belonged. As the dirt continued to rain down, down, down. Jennifer cried out in her husky, deep voice, trying to pull out of Corky's desperate hug. The pennant, which she had clutched all the while, fell from her hand. Corky watched it drop into the hole. It landed silently among the bones and worms. They wrestled nearer to the edge of the hole, with all her strength, tightening her arms around Jennifer's waist, trying to throw her down. Jennifer pulled back, crying out in protest. Closer to the hole, closer to the edge. I can do it, Corky thought. I can do it. But then Jennifer turned to face her, her eyes wild with fury. She opened her mouth wide, wider, and a wind blew out, a stench, a vapor, a wind that howled over Corky, covered her face, filled her nostrils. Jennifer tilted her head, closed her eyes, and the vapor roared out of her, reeking of death, of decay, of all that is foul. It blew into Corky's face, hot and wet and sour. Corky gagged and turned her face. But the wind still howled out of Jennifer's mouth, encircling Corky, and choked her in its thick, hot stench. I'm going to suffocate, she thought. I can't breathe. I'm going to suffocate. The smell is too sickening. Corky realized she was weakening, about to lose the fight. One last tug. She held her breath and braced herself, summoned all of her remaining strength for one last tug. Now, she told herself, and heaved with all her might, her arms wrapped tightly around Jennifer's waist. Into the grave, Corky thought. Jennifer, go down into the grave. But Jennifer was too strong. The foul wind raged and howled from her open mouth. Jennifer didn't budge. I'm lost, Corky thought. Chapter 26. Buried. Corky felt her arms slip off Jennifer's waist. I'm lost. I'm lost. As the dirt rained down, she could suddenly hear the terrified cries of the 3 girls. Jennifer's eyes were open wide as the sour wind howled from her mouth. She knew she had won. She knew her evil had triumphed. First Bobby, now me, Corky thought. Bobby. The thought of her sister filled her with renewed anger. With an anguished cry, Corky threw herself onto Jennifer's back and wrapped her hands around Jennifer's throat from behind. Jennifer struggled as Corky tightened her grip, tightened her hands. began to choke Jennifer, choke the evil spirit inside Jennifer's body, pushing her head down. The raging stream of foul vapor from Jennifer's mouth blew into the hole now, into the open grave. Corky could see it, blowing the worms around in the coffin. "Yes!" she cried aloud, hearing the wind lose its howl, feeling it weaken as it poured into the coffin. All the evil pouring down into the coffin. And as Corky continued to choke her, Jennifer felt lighter, light as air. And the wind stopped. Jennifer uttered a feeble groan, and the wind stopped. "Yes!" Corky cried, not loosening her grip on Jennifer's throat. The evil spirit is abandoning her, Corky thought. She could feel it leaving, could feel Jennifer's body growing light. Corky let go. Jennifer lay face down in the dirt. Corky watched as the coffin lid slammed shut, trapping the evil vapor, trapping the evil spirit inside. The dirt rained down in a dark, thunderous avalanche, filling the hole, recovering the grave. Buried. The evil spirit is buried again, Corky thought, gasping in the cool, sweet air, the clean air, letting the fresh night air fill her lungs. She realized she was still on her knees in the soft dirt. "Corky!" Kimmy was screaming. The 3 girls were standing right in front of her, peering at the grave in horror. They had seen it all. Seen every moment of Corky's desperate battle. Now they huddled around her. "Corky, are you okay?" Ronnie cried. All 4 of them turned their eyes to Jennifer's body. Slowly, Corky rolled her over so she was face up. "Oh," Kimmy groaned. Ronnie gagged and held on to Deborah to keep from sinking to her knees. As the girls gaped in silent horror, Jennifer's skin dried and crumpled, flaking off in chunks. Her long hair fell off, strands blowing away in the breeze. Her eyes sank back into her skull, then rotted into dark pits. Her cheerleader costume appeared to grow larger as her flesh decayed underneath it, and her bones appeared. Before Corky realized what was happening, she felt Kimmy's arm slide around her shoulders. "It's okay, Corky," Kimmy whispered. "You're okay now. It's all going to be okay." And then they heard a man's voice calling from the street.
"What's going on here?"
Darting beams from flashlights danced over the ground. The girls looked up into the suspicious faces of 2 uniformed Shadyside officers.
"What's going on here? One of the neighbors reported a..."
Both of the young officers gaped in surprise as they saw the body sprawled on the ground beside the 4 girls. The body draped in a cheerleader's costume.
"What on earth?"
"It's Jennifer," Corky managed to say from the midst of her confusion. "It's Jennifer Daly. I followed her here. She..."
"Huh?"
Both police directed their lights from the body to Corky's face.
"You followed her here? Are you sure, miss?"
"Yes, I followed her here. She was dancing..."
"You didn't follow this girl, miss,"
the policeman said, eyeing Corky intently.
"This girl hasn't been dancing tonight. Take a good look at the corpse. This girl has been dead for weeks."
Jennifer's anguished parents, awakened and summoned to the police station, had demanded answers. But there were no reasonable answers, no logical answers. Corky's parents had also arrived, as upset and confused as everyone else. They had waited patiently with their daughter during the hours of questioning, the police asking the same questions again and again, dissatisfied with the answers they received from Corky and the other 3 girls.
"Fear Street,"
one of the policemen had said grimly, shaking his head.
"Fear Street."
A few minutes later, he allowed them all to go home. As Corky climbed the stairs to her room, the room she had shared with her sister, she thought of Bobby. Bobby had died because of the evil spirit's jealousy. And now Corky was alone, left alone to remember forever the horrors of this night. She turned on the light and glanced at the bedside clock. 3 o'clock in the morning. Wearily, feeling numb, she tugged off her clothes, letting them fall to the floor, and pulled a nightgown over her head. "Bobby, I miss you so much," she cried out loud, trying to force back the sobs that threatened to burst out of her throat. She turned off the light and lowered herself into bed. "Bobby is gone forever," she told herself miserably. "But so is the evil spirit. The evil spirit is buried once again, buried in the old grave, locked in the coffin under 6 feet of dirt where it can't harm anyone ever again." She sighed, pulling the covers up to her chin. "Hey!" There was something in her bed. With a startled cry, she reached down, grabbed it, held it tightly. She clicked on the lamp and stared at it, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the light. It was the maroon and white pennant with Jennifer's name stitched across the front. She stared at the pennant, reading the name again and again. Then it fell from her hand, and she started to scream. The nightmare never ends when you visit Fear Street. Next, Cheerleaders the Second Evil. Corky Corcoran is trying to put the nightmare of her sister Bobby's death behind her. She's back on the Shady Side cheerleading squad and has become friends with Kimmy, Deborah, and Ronnie. But just when everything seems like it's back to normal for Corky, she hears horrible screams in the gym, notices a very strange young man following her, and thinks she sees her dead sister rise from the grave. And then the murders begin again. This was a Paris's Book Nook audio production, brought to you by Paris. Me. That's just me. So thanks for listening, everyone, and stuttering. Oh God. Okay. I'll hope to see you soon in the next book.